You are more conditioned than you think. In fact, individuality might be the illusion. We walk through our cities, sit in our cubicles, and scroll through our feeds with an absolute certainty that we are the masters of our own minds. We believe our choices are ours, our ambitions are personal, and our self is a sacred isolation island. But if you pull back past the noise of the ego and the chatter of the 24-hour news cycle, the picture changes. From a high enough orbit, our society functions eerily close to a colony of ants or a hive of bees. We are, by almost every biological metric, a eusocial species. In the natural world, eusociality is the gold standard of survival. It is defined by a rigid division of labor and a collective instinct that prioritizes the hive over the self. The worker ant doesn't wonder if she's living her best life. She simply carries the leaf because the colony must eat. The bee doesn't have to have an identity crisis. He defends the hive because the hive is the only reality that matters. We look at them and see mindless machines. We look at ourselves and see individuals, but look closer at our assembly lines, our supply chains, and our digital networks. We have the labor, we have the instinct, we have the hive. The only difference is that we are the only social species on Earth that is convinced it isn't one. And that lie, the myth of the isolated I, is exactly where our mental health begins to fracture. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort experienced when holding two conflicting beliefs, values, or behaviors simultaneously. Psychologists describe it as a mental tug of war, a nagging sense of unease that something isn't right. But in the modern world, this discomfort isn't a glitch, it is our daily bread. From the moment we are born, we are fed a steady diet of individualism. We are told that everyone is unique, that we are the protagonists of our own stories, and that we all have a specific divine purpose. We are raised to believe in the I. Then we enter the workforce. The moment you punch that clock or log into that server, the I is expected to vanish in the office or on the assembly line. The myth of uniqueness is a liability. We wear the same uniforms, literal or metaphorical, and perform the same repetitive tasks. To keep the machine running smoothly, we are told that politics and religion are off limits. Essentially, the very things that define our individual worldviews must be checked at the door. The irony is that the company functions effectively precisely because we have temporarily hived up. It succeeds when we act like bees, but it pays us in the currency of the individual money for our time, our effort, and our personal drive. This creates a permanent state of the psychological fracture. We are trying to be a self in a world that only has room for cells. So we have to ask the question, is our obsession with creativity, passion, and personality building a cohesive society, or is it the very thing causing it to collapse? If a hive animal spends its whole life pretending it's a solo predator, the result isn't freedom. It is a nervous breakdown on a global scale. Whenever we have short moments of daydreaming, when we do something embarrassing, when we have emotional depth, we are told this is normal. Our culture treats these experiences, shame, longing, the search for purpose, as the hallmarks of a rich inner life. We call it being human. We are told that the voice in our head, the one that replays an awkward conversation from 5 years ago, or wonders, is this all there is the core of our identity. But what if we've been misdiagnosing ourselves for millennia? What if the mindsets that make us individuals are actually biological interference? Think of a worker ant. It does not daydream about being a queen. It does not feel the sting of embarrassment if it trips over a pebble. It does not search for a higher purpose because its purpose is physically hardwired into its very existence. It is at peace because it is integrated. Humanity, however, is a species in a state of permanent psychological friction. We have self-interest in a world that requires collective cooperation. We have emotional depth that often manifests as paralyzing anxiety or depression. We have a need for purpose because we have lost the natural biological purpose of the hive. What we call normal might actually be the symptoms of a fractured mind. We are like cells in a body that have suddenly become self aware, and in that self awareness, they have stopped working for the heart and started worrying about their own career goals. By, by prioritizing the I, we have created a world of 8 billion tiny competing gods, all suffering from the same isolation. We aren't finding ourselves, we are getting lost in the noise of a biological error. Take a look around, what do you see? Everywhere we turn, the evidence of a fractured species is staring back at us. We see institutional surveillance that monitors our movements, social erosion that dissolves our communities, and police multiculturalism that forces us into rigid, separate categories rather than a unified whole. We hear whispers of shadow elites and secret societies, the architects we blame for chaos. For many of us who find ourselves pulled toward conspiracy theories, the motivation isn't a lack of logic, it is an instinctual response to a very real threat. We are constantly mourning the loss of 3 sacred pillars: safety, privacy, and freedom. But why do these institutions, the media, the corporations, the shadow powers work so hard to keep us in a state of hypervigilance? In a eusocial colony, there is no need for surveillance because there is no secret behavior. Every action is for the benefit of the whole. There is no need for policing identity because the only identity is the hive. What if the surveillance and the secrecy we fear are actually the tools of the individual stage? These structures exist to manage a species that refuses to cooperate. They are the bars on the cage of the ego. We fear the loss of our privacy because the I is the only thing we think we have left. We are taught to fear a one-world government or a global hive as the ultimate nightmare, but look at the alternative we currently live in. A world where 8 billion individuals are watched by machines because we can no longer trust each other. We are policed because we have lost the internal biological discipline of the matriarchal hive. Our conspiracy theories are the screams of a hive animal that knows it's being kept in solitary confinement. Functional systems can operate effectively in the short term, but they may still be built upon a broken awareness. Our modern world is a masterpiece of short-term functioning. Our logistics move goods across oceans in days. Our algorithms serve up information in milliseconds. On the surface, the system works. But this efficiency is a mask. It is a functional system built on a broken awareness. A system with broken awareness is like a body that has lost the ability to feel pain. It can keep running, keep working, and keep consuming, but it fails to address the root causes of its own decay. It ignores the trauma of its individual cells and the environmental signals of a planet in distress. In our current individualist model, we treat mental health as a personal chore, something you fix on your own time so you can get back to being a productive part of the machine. We treat environmental collapse as a technicality to be managed by future generations. This is the definition of a system that has lost its mind. True healthy functioning requires that the system's awareness is not broken, that it acknowledges its true state, environment, and needs. To become a truly healthy eusocial species, our awareness must expand beyond the I. A real hive doesn't ignore a wounded member. A real organism doesn't poison the air it breathes. Healthy functioning means moving from survival efficiency. How much can we produce before we crash? To biological integrity. How do we align our collective behavior with the health of the earth? We have spent centuries building a system that is incredibly effective at making money, but completely broken at sustaining life. To fix it, we don't need better software. We need to repair the awareness of the hardware. We need to stop pretending that the parts, the individuals, can be healthy if the whole, the species, and the planet is dying. Eusocial species can synchronize their movements and activity cycles, and though brain scans do show that humans' brain activity and heart rates can synchronize, our ideologies and individualism constantly break up the synchronization. Much like rock bands and dance crews, the best comparison, though, is how humans and eusocial creatures synchronize with simple local rules, but sensory modalities and decision making structures differ significantly. Humans are primarily audiovisual based on 180-degree views. Eusocial creatures rely on chemosensory and tactile interactions. Both strategies are very accurate, but our ego, individuality, and ignorance corrupt this structure. How often do we bump into things, and how many car accidents are caused because we are too busy looking at phones, doing makeup? The list goes on. But these hazards are reduced dramatically if we just cared about a greater good. Nothing grandiose, just something as simple as getting home safely. Human crowds are flexible and egalitarian, but yet our work does not synchronize because we always want to do a different job than the ones we are given. Eusocial species just accept and execute. Eusocial creatures don't need a self to function. We obsess over the self and we are barely functioning nowadays. Psychological fracture is not a formal medical diagnosis, but it is a descriptive term, a mental state of fragmentation caused by extreme stress, trauma, or the physical link between mental health and bone fragility. This fracture isn't just a feeling, it is a systemic breakdown of the human hardware. We often treat the mind and body as separate, but the link between our mental state and our physical density, our very bones, suggests that when the eye breaks, the body follows. We are literally becoming more fragile as we become more isolated. The default mode network is central to this process because it is the primary network responsible for maintaining a united sense of self. Think of the default mode network, or DMN, as the firmware of your identity. It is the part of the brain that stitches together your past, your future, and your ego into a single cohesive story. It is the I in the machine, but in the modern world, this network is under constant assault. When the DMN becomes dysregulated or fractures due to the trauma of modern individualism, our identity doesn't change, it compartmentalizes. When the DMN is dysregulated, it significantly alters how humans perceive and contribute to group efficiency. Because the DMN is the engine of social cognition, a fracture here means you can no longer see where you fit into the hive. You lose the ability to understand your role within the team. Not because you're lazy, but because your brain has lost the map of the we. Humans don't just experience life, we analyze it. Internal dialogue never stops, and we can never fully trust what we think, let alone what we are told. This is the ultimate curse of the fractured DMN. While an ant exists in a state of pure, trustful action, the human mind is a locked room where the I never stops talking. We are caught in a feedback loop of simulation and suspicion. We are the only animals on Earth that have to convince ourselves to participate in our own survival. Because our internal dialogue is fractured, we are perpetually out of sync, both with each other and with the Earth itself. The concepts of identity, self-awareness, and freedom are paradoxically both the anchors of stability and the primary drivers of instability, fragmentation, and disconnection. We treat these concepts as the bedrock of healthy life, but when they are formed under the heat of trauma or the pressures of an individualist culture, they become brittle. When a person anchors their entire sense of self to a single role, the success, the protector, the outcast, they aren't building a foundation. They are building a cage. Any shift in that role doesn't just feel like a life change. It feels like the total destabilization of the self. If the role cracks, the person shatters. While self awareness is usually a goal of growth, hyper self awareness can trigger a psychological fracture. In existential psychology, freedom is often viewed as a burden, a weight that can lead to profound isolation. True freedom doesn't mean there are no fixed instructions for how you should be, no pre written script to follow. For a biological creature designed for the collective certainty of a hive, this is overwhelming. To escape the crushing responsibility of this freedom, many of us choose to disconnect. We fall into dissociation or live in bad faith, pretending we have no choice in our actions just to feel the safety of a constraint. This creates a permanent fracture between our own true potential and our lived reality. We feel trapped even when we are technically free, paralyzed by the noise of having to choose who to be every single day. Self awareness, identity, and freedom are the drivers that transition a person from a collection of biological traits into a conscious, unique individual. We have a name for this specific collection of fractures, roles, and mirrored self reflections. We call this personality. We hold on to it as if it's the most real thing we own. But as we look at the rising rates of mental collapse and the fragility of our social structures, we have to ask the terrifying question: how stable is it, really? Or is personality just the name we give to the way our biological unity has broken apart? My hypothesis is that humans should be a eusocial species, but generations of trauma and under prioritized mental health have sustained a prolonged mass psychosis. We are not just failing to move forward, we are actively regressing. This mass psychosis isn't a sudden break from reality, but a slow, generational erosion of our collective sanity. Because we have ignored the broken awareness of our species for so long, the trauma has become systemic. It is no longer just hindering our evolution, it is reversing it. We are starting to lose the very complex features that once defined our humanity. We are trading our high level social cognition and our deep intuitive connection to the earth for the shallow, flickering light of a screen. Especially with technology and smartphones, our intelligence is no longer useful. In a healthy eusocial colony, intelligence is distributed and functional, but in our fractured state, we have outsourced our minds to our pockets. We don't need to remember, to navigate, or to empathize with an algorithm that can simulate those things for us. As our biological eye becomes more obsessed with its digital reflection, the hardware of our brain begins to our brain begins to atrophy. We are becoming a species of disconnected cells, hyper individualized in our egos, but functionally useless to the whole. Adding this to the lens of systemic power, the leaders of the world may be the only ones who retain what we once held so dear. This is the dark irony of our current trajectory. While the masses are encouraged to sink further into the distraction of the eye and the dependency of the smartphone, the shadow structures, the elite, the architects, are the only ones maintaining a cohesive strategic awareness. They are the only ones who still understand how to function as a unit, while the rest of us are kept in a state of fractured, hyper-aware isolation. We are being managed into a state of biological helplessness, losing the very traits that would allow us to rise up and function as a unified hive. So how did this fracture start? When did it start? If we were meant to be a synchronized eusocial unit, a species that moves with the fluid certainty of the hive, then we have to find the moment the signal went dead. Was this fracture a necessary step in our evolution, a painful, awkward phase on the way to something greater? Or was it a catastrophic biological mistake, a wrong turn taken in the deep past that we've been trying to correct ever since? Are we getting worse because our society was built on a fracture? We look at our modern chaos and blame our politicians, our economics, and our apps. But those are just the symptoms. If the foundation of our civilization was poured into a cracked mold, then every skyscraper, every law, and every digital network that we build will only deepen that original split. We are trying to build a global home for a species that is fundamentally broken at the level of the eye. We find ourselves in a race against our own regression, losing the very traits that makes us human while we cling to the illusion of our own importance. We cannot fix the present until we understand the past. We cannot heal the mass psychosis until we find the wound. The real question is, what broke?